Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be letting you guys in on a little secret that pro players know about and that pro players are using to win more games in Age of Empires 2. Now this is a trick that it's somewhat obvious but somewhat not, but it's a concept that's easy to apply once you learn it. So this video should be a huge help to those that want to improve at the game, and even if you don't want to improve at the game, just knowing this can make it a lot more fruitful when you watch pro games, because you can keep an eye on what they're doing when a pro player has the situation that I will talk about in a second. When that situation arises, you as a watcher will be well aware of what's going on, so it can make your watching experience a little bit better as well. The secret I'm going to be talking about in this video is about making useless army useful. And the useless army, it's very important to understand what that is so we can understand how to make it useful and how to take advantage of that situation. Useless army is basically army that you don't want to upgrade, or army that doesn't scale well, or army that's past its prime in the game. I'll give you a few examples so you should understand what I'm talking about here. Take for example a militia rush in Dark Age. 2 or 3 militia in Dark Age are very strong because there's no other units on the field. Militia against villagers is a pretty even fight, so those 3 militia can do quite a bit of damage. Take those 2 or 3 militia in late feudal age where there's archers and scouts in the field. Take those 2 or 3 militia in castle age where there's castles and town centers and knights on the field. They are completely useless. So as you can see, if you do invest into militia, which are quite expensive, 60 food and 20 gold is not cheap, you want to make use of them in Dark Age or early feudal age. If they go past that point, they are fairly useless. And this is a very common theme in Age of Empires, where you have to make army at a certain point, and that army has a really useful few minutes where it's strong and it could do a lot of damage, and it could be a very nice tool to pull ahead. And then past that few minutes window, it becomes utterly useless. And if you miss that window, then you're actually falling behind without even realizing it. So in that case with the militia, we should thrive to use the militia way before feudal age and castle age, because if it gets there, the militia will be useless. I'll give you a few other examples to really hit this home. For example, we all know that Franks are a cavalry or a paladin civ. However, in feudal age, you can't always just play scouts into knights into paladin and just scale through the game with only cavalry. If you do this, your opponent could be on camels, monks, and pikes, and you're gonna have a really hard time. So it's very common for the Frank player at some point in the game to be on spears himself, to be on archers, to be on skirmishers, to be on these units that are not necessarily the paladin line, and they don't necessarily scale as well. For example, a Frank player going for a few archers to counter spearmen in feudal age, those archers can scale nicely into castle age via crossbowmen, via bodkin arrow, but then in imperial age, you're first of all lacking thumb ring for late castle age, and second of all lacking bracer and arbalest, as well as the last archer armor in imperial age. So as you can see, those crossbows do not scale into imperial age. So with that in mind, the crossbows have to be used in castle age. Now similarly, the militia had to be used in dark age. Let's talk about one last example before I teach you guys how to use that army and how to find value with it. For example, you're playing as the Saracens and you have a lot of knights. Saracens do not get cavalier, therefore the knights are incredibly strong in castle age. Now is it a mistake for the Saracen players to make those knights in the first place? Sometimes it could be a mistake, but sometimes it is not a mistake. Sometimes you need to make a unit that is very useful right away, but just doesn't necessarily scale. And so the Saracens making knights, the Franks making archers, they have their place in the game, but they just simply don't scale into the late game. So as we transition from the mid game to the late game, from the castle age to the imperial age, it's very important to use the army that is going to be useless very soon, and then at the same time switch into the useful army that you want to have in the late game. So we're going to be doing 2 things here. Number 1 is making use of the army that doesn't scale, and number 2, teching or transitioning into the army that does scale. Let's start by taking the Franks example again. Let's say the Franks have 15 to 20, maybe 25 crossbows in castle age. Those units absolutely do not scale in imperial age, so as the Frank player is going into imperial age, it is very natural for him to start teching into either halberdier or cavalier into paladin. Those 2 units, Franks get fully upgraded, so depending on the situation, you'd go for one or the other. You might even think about going hand cannoneer. In all 3 of those cases, the crossbowman will no longer be useful in imperial age for the simple reason that you just won't have the upgrades necessary to make it an imperial age unit. The same reason why the militia is not useful in castle age, the crossbowman will not be useful in imperial age. And so what the Frank player should do in this precise moment is, as he's transitioning into cavalier, for argument's sake, he will be vulnerable. He will be getting technologies, he'll be dropping stables, he won't necessarily have the infrastructure to start pumping out knights right away, so he needs some time. In that time, you want to make use of the crossbowman army right now. You don't want to have that just sitting back doing nothing. This is the time where this army is strong. If you wait a few minutes, it will become useless. So what pro players will do is one of 2 things. They either use the crossbowman to defend or trade against enemy army to make sure that the enemy army cannot attack them, or they use the crossbowman to attack the opponent player's economy. This is the preferred choice. Attacking economy with useless army is better than trading against other army that could be useless as well. This is where you need to put the gas on. Those crossbowmen should dive as deep as possible. Literally go through town centers, doors, go through walls, micro against mangonels. Anything you need to do to get value with those crossbowmen and to kill some villagers is gonna be worth it, because those crossbowmen have a timer on them, and once that timer runs out, they are no longer useful. It would be way harder to get value with those crossbowmen once Imperial Age hits for both players and they have strong army on the field than it is in Castle Age, where there's just a few town centers and not that many powerful units on the field. So come Imperial Age, you're gonna have a stronger economy going for the paladin, and your opponent will have a weaker economy, and potentially they had some army that was useless. Let's say they had 10 skirms to match your crossbowmen. Those 10 skirmishers, if they didn't put them to any use, you will destroy them with one cavalier. And if they lost 5 or 10 villagers to your crossbowmen, those 5 or 10 villagers are now completely gone. And so once the skirms and the crossbows are dead, for argument's sake, the villagers are also dead and have been dead, and so your opponent is behind a couple thousand resources, even though the useless army was gone on both sides. One useless army, the crossbowman, killed a few vills. On the other side, the skirmishers maybe touched or tickled a cavalier. And so as you can see by this, the transition is not just, slapping down stables and making a new army or a new unit. The transition is very much planned out when it comes to pro play, and we're very careful about how we use this useless army to make it as useful as possible before their date of expiration. Now, just because we want to put this useless army to some kind of effectiveness does not mean we want to just simply waste it. Wasting it is actually the worst thing you can do, because sometimes that useless army, although it's useless, can be used to buy yourself a couple minutes, which can be crucial in a transition. If you just simply send it in and waste it and get zero value out of it, then you leave yourself vulnerable to your opponent attacking you in that transition period and preventing you from getting that nice transition timing and actually just screwing your game altogether. So just because we want to use it does not mean we want to waste it. Be very careful when it comes to that. Now, I will talk about one last scenario before ending the video. Let's talk about the scenario where you're making your scaling army from the start. By the way, this is the best thing that you can do with a civilization, is make your best unit from the very start. The reason why you can't do this every game is because you will get countered. As I mentioned earlier, if Franks go for scouts into knights into paladin, they're going to be running into halbs, camels, and monks, and it's not going to be pretty. However, in the situation that the Frank player can go scouts into knights into paladin, and your opponent is not on counter units, and the knights are doing work in Castle Age, this is perfect. Why? Because then the 20 knights in Castle Age that you have, you don't need to waste those. You're not in a rush to make use of those, because that is your scaling unit. This is the best case scenario. Think about Huns with cav archers. They build up the mass in Castle Age. By the time Imperial Age hits, they have the 40 cav archers that they've been building up that got so much value in Castle Age because the cavalry archer is a strong unit there. Now it gets even more value in Imperial Age because it's their main unit. So as you can see, a scaling unit made in the Castle Age going into Imperial Age as your transition, you don't need to switch into another unit. You can just stay on that unit, upgrade it, and you already have your army set up. This is best case scenario. This is what you should try to be doing in every game, and the only reason you alter this plan is if your opponent has a counter, or as if your opponent prevents you from doing that. If your opponent does nothing to prevent you, you stay on your plan A. You stay on your best unit, because that makes the transition from Castle Age to Imperial Age so simple. You don't need to make new production buildings, you just need to get upgrades. Franks have 20 knights in castle, boom, Imperial Age hits, you click cavalier, you have cavalier within a minute or two, and all of a sudden you don't need to make a transition, and so you have 20-30 cavalier that scales into 40-50 paladin, and your opponent has a nightmare composition to deal with, which is basically 50 or 60 Frank paladin running around his base with maybe some siege behind it. So just to recap, ideally we're on our scaling unit from the start. If we're not on our scaling unit, if we had to make any other unit for whatever reason, militia in Dark Age to harass, archers in Feudal Age to put pressure, or maybe mangonels and scorpions in Castle Age, these units that simply don't scale well in a particular scenario, if you're playing as the Franks for example, then you want to make use of those units when they are strong, and as soon as they're about to expire, as soon as the date of expiration is coming close, just try to use them as effectively as possible to attack your opponent's army or to attack your opponent's economy to give you time to make the transition into the useful unit. I hope this concept is now clear to you, and I know it might seem like a very obvious one or very simple concept, but this is actually one of the harder things to get done in Age of Empires. This is one of my personal challenges from getting to a strong pro player to a top pro player, is learning how to make those transitions, and this is one of those secret tricks that help me make this transition consistently and allow me to get into winning positions in Imperial Age. To this day, I still use this by the book every single time when I can. This video was supposed to be a Patreon exclusive guide, but I decided to put it out on YouTube because it's been a while since I've done a YouTube guide, so hope you guys enjoyed it. If you want more guides like this, check out my Patreon. I've got a ton more content. It's very similar to this, exclusive guides to help you guys get better. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Like, comment, and subscribe if you guys did, and check me out Twitch, Patreon, link in the description below. Take care and have a good rest of your day. Peace.